Call a member for Bowman.
Deputy Speaker, yet another contributor in this debate, considering a bill obviously for changing the Citizenship Act to streamline the process of inter-country adoption. I really only rise to deliver a cautionary note in this area, having lived overseas for a significant part of my pre-political life, and being a little bit cautious about this extremely complicated area of inter-country adoption, and obviously having seen some of the source countries from where these children originate. And there is that temptation, I think, to, in a very superficial way sometimes, visualise this as effectively an airlift out of the red zone for children who have no future in source countries, and this general Western notion that we offer them all a better life. And I've got no doubt that there is an incredible amount of love in recipient parents who in many cases have explored every other option to no avail. So it's encouraging to see in at least the Hague Convention a genuine focus on identifying what are the best interests of the child. And I also can see that probably the most frustrating thing for impassioned and well-meaning parents in a place like Australia is to see a reduction in the cost, in the waits and in the uncertainty around adopting a child. But I wonder whether, when we look back on this debate and read it decades from now, that we might just feel that we might well have skimmed over some of the more sensitive elements in this debate. They're ones that are almost imponderable to us now, but we need to be extraordinarily cautious when we move minors, in most cases infants, from one nation to another. And while we in this chamber have absolutely no doubt that by setting up bureaucratic protections that we can ensure the best interests of the child, I want to make the simple point that that's not quite so simple in a number of source countries to do. Now, I know that in some cases we're dealing with free democracies and fairly elaborate public service structures where there can be some hope of that occurring, but that's not always the case. It's not always the case that we can be 100% sure that this will be in the best interests of the child, and we don't have to go much further than recent media reports between arrangements made between Thailand and Australia. But I'm also concerned, in essence, that at a judgment by an individual, by an official, that this is an act of last resort may not always be the case. And while it may well be written in the conventions and in the legislation that this should be an option of last resort, I'm aware of two things. I know, first of all, that we are a nation that invests heavily in enabling couples to become families. We have probably the world's most generous IVF arrangements, and we're seeing an expansion in surrogacy as well. Now, that doesn't suit everyone, I understand that, and adoption plays an incredibly important role there. But I just wonder whether, decades from now, we will look back and be absolutely certain that each one of these arrangements, with all the information that we have before us right now, will have been in the child's best interest. If there's one sense that I have deep in my heart, it is that a decade or two from now, we will have a very, very different view about the importance of children remaining with birth parents, with extended families, and within their own cultures. And I think it's just a prescient but also cautionary note that we need to remember that in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, we should never assume that simply because we have more resources here, a child's life will automatically be better. And I've got no doubt also there's an enormous selection bias at play, where those children that have come to live in Australia will almost always say that that has been an enriching and a better experience having done it. But we need to remember there is also a family at home. There is also a family and extended family unit in that developing economy, which not only remains silent, but is almost completely disengaged from this process. So I appreciate the efforts here to simplify and to streamline, to make certainly sure that these are adoptions of last resort, but I do remain very concerned that that child that moves from one country to another leaves behind, like a furrow in a field, a gap that can never be filled. Never filled, not simply because there may have been, in this case, no direct biological first-degree parent, but because we've made an assessment that their life will be better somewhere else. That we've made an assessment that that child doesn't necessarily belong as part of a greater extended family, simply because at that temporal moment in time we couldn't actually find the appropriate people to fill that role. I'm concerned that there will be through expanding these networks, a greater and greater demand upon these officials in source countries to set up these arrangements and to ensure that they occur. And I guess in some ways the great risk, of course, of coming up with a system that has less cost, less weight and less uncertainty is that we reduce that window of opportunity to ensure that this is absolutely in the child's best interest. I've got an enormous amount of faith in the people that are working often in very, very uncertain arrangements in difficult economies. But I think we just need to, for a moment, release ourselves from this notion that we are airlifting children to a better future and to a better life, because that is a distinctly Western way of examining this problem. I commend the fact that we're part of the Convention. I commend the fact that we're identifying one-to-one strong bilateral relationships with countries where we'll be engaging in this process, but I would make that cautionary and concluding note that we must never ever forget that from these source countries we leave behind a family that for many cases, while our instantaneous assessment now is that the child is better off, I would love to know that that family unit and the broader culture is also better off having participated in inter-country adoptions.